Section 1 of Scenes in the Life of Harriet Tubman by Sarah H. Bradford. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Harriet Tubman, known at various times and in various places by many different names, such as Moses, in allusion to her being the leader and guide to so many of her people in their exodus from the land of bondage, the conductor of the Underground Railroad, and Moll Pitcher for the energy and daring by which she delivered a fugitive slave who was about to be dragged back to the South, was for the first 25 years of her life a slave on the eastern shore of Maryland. Her own master she represents as never unnecessarily cruel, but, as was common among slaveholders, he often hired out his slaves to others, some of whom proved to be tyrannical and brutal to the utmost limit of their power. She had worked only as a field hand for many years, following the oxen, loading and unloading wood, and carrying heavy burdens, by which her naturally remarkable power of muscle was so developed that her feats of strength often called forth the wonder of strong laboring men. Thus was she preparing for the life of hardship and endurance which lay before her, for the deeds of daring she was to do, and of which her ignorant and darkened mind at that time never dreamed. The first person by whom she was hired was a woman who, though married and the mother of a family, was still Miss Susan to her slaves, as is customary at the South. This woman was possessed of the good things of this life, and provided liberally for her slaves so far as food and clothing went. But she had been brought up to believe, and to act upon the belief, that a slave could be taught to do nothing, and would do nothing but under the sting of the whip. Harriet, then a young girl, was taken from her life in the field, and having never seen the inside of a house better than a cabin in the negro quarters, was put to housework without being told how to do anything. The first thing was to put a parlor in order. Move these chairs and tables into the middle of the room, sweep the carpet clean, then dust everything and put them back in their places. These were the directions given, and Harriet was left alone to do her work. The whip was in sight on the mantelpiece as a reminder of what was to be expected if the work was not done well. Harriet fixed the furniture as she was told to do, and swept with all her strength, raising a tremendous dust. The moment she had finished sweeping, she took her dusting cloth and wiped everything so you could see your face in 'em, 'tis shown so, in haste to go and set the table for breakfast, and to do her other work. The dust which she had set flying only settled down again on chairs, tables, and the piano. Miss Susan came in and looked around. Then came the call for Minty. Harriet's name was Araminta at the South. She drew her up to the table, saying, "What do you mean by doing my work this way, you?" And passing her finger on the table and piano, she showed her the mark it made through the dust. "Miss Susan, I done sweep and dust just as you told me." But the whip was already taken down, and the strokes were falling on head and face and neck. 4 times this scene was repeated before breakfast, when during the 5th whipping the door opened and Miss Emily came in. She was a married sister of Miss Susan, and was making her a visit, and though brought up with the same associations as her sister, seems to have been a person of more gentle and reasonable nature. Not being able to endure the screams of the child any longer, she came in, took her sister by the arm, and said, "If you do not stop whipping that child, I will leave your house and never come back." Miss Susan declared that she would not mind, and she slighted her work on purpose. Miss Emily said, "Leave her to me a few moments," and Miss Susan left the room indignant. As soon as they were alone, Miss Emily said, "Now, Minty, show me how you do your work." For the sixth time Harriet moved all the furniture into the middle of the room. Then she swept, and the moment she had done sweeping she took the dusting cloth to wipe off the furniture. "Now stop there," said Miss Emily. "Go away now and do some of your other work, and when it is time to dust I will call you." When the time came she called her and explained to her how the dust had now settled, and that if she wiped it off now the furniture would remain bright and clean. These few words an hour or two before would have saved Harriet her whippings for that day, as they probably did for many a day after. While with this woman, after working from early morning till late at night, she was obliged to sit up all night to rock a cross sick child. Her mistress laid upon her bed with a whip under her pillow and slept, but if the tired nurse forgot herself for a moment, if her weary head dropped and her hand ceased to rock the cradle, the child would cry out, and then down would come the whip upon the neck and face of the poor weary creature. The scars are still plainly visible where the whip cut into the flesh. Perhaps her mistress was preparing her, though she did not know it then, by this enforced habit of wakefulness, for the many long nights of travel when she was the leader and guide of the weary and hunted ones who were escaping from bondage. Miss Susan got tired of Harriet, as Harriet was determined she should do, and so abandoned her intention of buying her, and sent her back to her master. She was next hired out to the man who inflicted upon her the lifelong injury from which she is suffering now, by breaking her skull with a weight from the scales. The injury thus inflicted causes her often to fall into a state of somnolency from which it is almost impossible to rouse her. Disabled and sick, her flesh all wasted away, she was returned to her owner. He tried to sell her, but no one would buy her. "They say they wouldn't give a sixpence for me," she said. And so, she said, from Christmas till March I worked as I could, and I prayed through all the long nights. I groaned and prayed for old master. "O Lord, convert master. O Lord, change that man's heart." "Appears like I prayed all de time," says Harriet, "'bout my work, everywhere. I prayed and I groaned to the Lord. When I went to the horse trough to wash my face, I took up the water in my hand and I said, 'O Lord, wash me, make me clean.' Then I take up something to wipe my face and I say, 'O Lord, wipe away all my sin.' When I took the broom and began to sweep, I groaned, 'O Lord, whatsoever sin there be in my heart, sweep it out, Lord, clear and clean.'" No words can describe the pathos of her tones as she broke out into these words of prayer after the manner of her people. "And so," said she, "I prayed all night long for master till the 1st of March, and all the time he was bringing people to look at me and trying to sell me. Then we heard that some of us was going to be sold to go with the chain gang down to the cotton and rice fields, and they say I was going with my brothers and sisters. Then I changed my prayer. 1st of March I began to pray, 'O Lord, if you ain't never going to change that man's heart, kill him, Lord, and take him out of de way.' Next thing I heard old master was dead, and he died just as he lived. Oh, then it appeared like I'd give all de world full of gold if I had it, to bring that poor soul back, but I couldn't pray for him no longer. The slaves were told that their master's will provided that none of them should be sold out of the state. This satisfied most of them, and they were very happy. But Harriet was not satisfied. She never closed her eyes that she did not imagine she saw the horsemen coming, and heard the screams of women and children as they were being dragged away to a far worse slavery than that they were enduring there. Harriet was married at this time to a free negro, who not only did not trouble himself about her fears, but did his best to betray her and bring her back after she escaped. She would start up at night with the cry, "Oh, they're comin', they're comin', I must go." Her husband called her a fool, and said she was like old Cudjo, who, when a joke went round, never laughed till half an hour after everybody else got through. And so, just as all danger was past, she began to be frightened. But still Harriet in fancy saw the horsemen coming, and heard the screams of terrified women and children. And all that time, in my dreams and visions, she said, I seemed to see a line, and on the other side of that line were green fields and lovely flowers, and beautiful white ladies who stretched out their arms to me over the line, but I couldn't reach them nohow. I always fell before I got to the line. One Saturday it was whispered in the quarters that 2 of Harriet's sisters had been sent off with the chain gang. That morning she started, having persuaded 3 of her brothers to accompany her. But they had not gone far when the brothers, appalled by the dangers before and behind them, determined to go back, and in spite of her remonstrances dragged her with them. In fear and terror she remained over Sunday, and on Monday night a negro from another part of the plantation came privately to tell Harriet that herself and brothers were to be carried off that night. The poor old mother, who belonged to the same mistress, was just going to milk. Harriet wanted to get away without letting her know, because she knew that she would raise an uproar and prevent her going, or insist upon going with her, and the time for this was not yet. But she must give some intimation to those she was going to leave of her intention, and to send such a farewell as she might to the friends and relations on the plantation. These communications were generally made by singing. They sang as they walked along the country roads, and the chorus was taken up by others, and the uninitiated knew not the hidden meaning of the words. When that old chariot comes, I'm going to leave you. I'm bound for the promised land. I'm going to leave you. These words meant something more than a journey to the heavenly Canaan. Harriet said, "Here, mother, go along. I'll do the milking tonight and bring it in." The old woman went to her cabin. Harriet took down her sunbonnet and went on to the big house where some of her relatives lived as house servants. She thought she could trust Mary, but there were others in the kitchen, and she could say nothing. Mary began to frolic with her. She threw her across the kitchen and ran out, knowing that Mary would follow her. But just as they turned the corner of the house, the master to whom Harriet was now hired came riding up on his horse. Mary darted back, and Harriet thought there was no way now but to sing. But the doctor, as the master was called, was regarded with special awe by his slaves. If they were singing or talking together in the field or on the road, and the doctor appeared, all was hushed till he passed. But Harriet had no time for ceremony. Her friends must have a warning, and whether the doctor thought her impertinent or not, she must sing him farewell. So on she went to meet him, singing, "I'm sorry I'm going to leave you. Farewell, oh, farewell. But I'll meet you in the morning. Farewell, oh, farewell." The doctor passed, and she bowed as she went on, still singing, "I'll meet you in the morning. I'm bound for the promised land, on the other side of Jordan, bound for the promised land." She reached the gate and looked round. The doctor had stopped his horse and had turned around in the saddle and was looking at her as if there might be more in this than met the ear. Harriet closed the gate, went on a little way, came back, the doctor still gazing at her. She lifted up the gate as if she had not latched it properly, waved her hand to him, and burst out again, "I'll meet you in the morning, safe in the promised land, on the other side of Jordan, bound for the promised land." And she started on her journey, not knowing whither she went, except that she was going to follow the North Star till it led her to liberty. Cautiously and by night she traveled, cunningly feeling her way and finding out who were friends, till after a long and painful journey she found in answer to careful inquiries that she had at last crossed that magic line which then separated the land of bondage from the land of freedom. For this was before we were commanded by law to take part in the iniquity of slavery, and aid in taking and sending back those poor hunted fugitives who had manhood and intelligence enough to enable them to make their way thus far towards freedom. "When I found I had crossed that line," she said, "I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven." But then came the bitter drop in the cup of joy. She said she felt like a man who was put in state prison for 25 years. All those 25 years he was thinking of his home and longing for the day when he would see it again. At last the day comes. He leaves the prison gates. He makes his way to his old home. But his old home is not there. The house has been pulled down and a new one has been put up in its place. His family and friends are gone, nobody knows where. There was no one to take him by the hand, no one to welcome him. So it was with me, she said. I had crossed the line. I was free. But there was no one to welcome me to the land of freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land. And my home, after all, was down in Maryland, because my father, my mother, my brothers and sisters and friends were there. But I was free, and they should be free. I would make a home in the North and bring them there, God helping me. Oh, how I prayed then, she said. I said to the Lord, I'm going to hold steady on to you, and I know you'll see me through. End of section 1.